The alarm clock screamed at 6:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 15 years. David Martinez rolled over in his king-size bed, reaching for his phone to check emails before his feet even hit the floor. The house was quiet, his wife Sarah was still sleeping, and their 2 kids wouldn't be up for another hour. David had built what he thought was the perfect life. A corner office on the 20th floor of downtown's most prestigious building. A 6-figure salary as a marketing director, a beautiful suburban home with a white picket fence, and a family that was the envy of his neighborhood. At 42, he felt like he had cracked the code of success. But success, as David was about to learn, could disappear faster than morning fog. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in March. David walked into his office building, badge ready, only to find his access card wouldn't work. The security guard, someone David had greeted every morning for years, avoided eye contact. "Sir, you'll need to speak with HR," the guard mumbled, pointing toward the elevator. David's stomach dropped. He'd heard whispers about budget cuts, but his department had been performing well. His latest campaign had generated record-breaking results. Surely he was safe. The elevator ride to the 10th floor felt like an eternity. Each floor that passed seemed to echo with the sound of his heartbeat. When the doors opened, David saw other employees carrying boxers' faces. He'd recognized colleagues he'd worked alongside for years. "David, please come in," said Jennifer from HR, her voice unusually formal. The meeting lasted exactly 7 minutes. Budget restructuring, position eliminated, effective immediately, severance package, security escort. The words blurred together like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "But the Morrison account?" David stammered. "I'm in the middle of negotiations worth $2 million. Someone else will handle that now," Jennifer replied, sliding a manila envelope across the desk. "I'm sorry, David. This wasn't an easy decision." Walking out of that building with a cardboard box containing 15 years of his professional life felt surreal. The security guard who had greeted him that morning now watched him leave, probably wondering if he'd be next. David sat in his car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at the concrete wall in front of him. How was he going to tell Sarah? How was he going to explain to his kids that Daddy lost his job? The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light gave him more time to think, more time to worry. The house came into view, their dream home with its perfectly manicured lawn and Sarah's flower garden. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks. "You're home early," Sarah called from the kitchen when she heard the door close. David set the box down in the hallway and walked toward her voice. She was preparing lunch for their 8-year-old daughter Emma, who had stayed home with a cold. "We need to talk," David said, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. Sarah turned around, immediately reading his expression. The sandwich she was making forgotten, she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "What happened?" "I lost my job." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked up from her coloring book at the kitchen table, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "What do you mean you lost your job?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. David explained everything, the security card, the HR meeting, the box in the hallway, with each detail. He watched his wife's face change from confusion to shock to something that looked like fear. "But we have the mortgage," she said, "and Emma's school tuition, and your car payment. I know the severance will help for a few months, but we need to start looking at our options." That night, after the kids were asleep, David and Sarah sat at their kitchen table surrounded by bills, bank statements, and calculators. The numbers didn't lie without his income. They had maybe 3 months before everything started falling apart. "I'll find something," David promised. "I have contacts. My resume is strong. This is just temporary." But as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, David couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much worse. 3 weeks of job hunting had yielded nothing but polite rejection emails and unreturned phone calls. David's confidence, once unshakable, began to crumble like a house of cards in a windstorm. The severance package, that had seemed generous at first, was disappearing faster than he'd anticipated. "Another interview?" Sarah asked, watching David adjust his tie in their bedroom mirror. "Henderson Marketing Group," he replied, trying to inject optimism into his voice. "They're looking for a senior marketing director. It's perfect for my background." Sarah nodded, but David could see the worry lines that had appeared around her eyes over the past month. She'd started working extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, but her income alone couldn't cover their expenses. The interview went well, or so David thought. He'd answered every question confidently, presented his portfolio with pride, and even made the interviewer laugh twice. Walking back to his car, He felt the first spark of hope he'd experienced in weeks. That spark was extinguished 2 days later with a phone call. "We've decided to go with someone else." The voice on the other end explained, "Your qualifications are impressive, but we found a candidate who was a better cultural fit." Cultural fit. David had heard that phrase 6 times. What did it really mean? Was he too old? Too expensive? Too desperate? The bills kept coming. The mortgage payment was late for the first time in 15 years. David had to swallow his pride and ask for an extension. Explaining his situation to a customer service representative who sounded younger than his teenage son, "We can give you a 30-day grace period," the representative said. "But after that, we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings." Foreclosure. The word hit David like a physical blow. He'd always been the responsible one, the provider, the man who had everything under control. Now he was 1 month away from losing the home where his children had taken their first steps. The stress was taking its toll on everyone. Emma, usually cheerful and talkative, had become quiet and withdrawn. Their 16-year-old son, Marcus, started spending more time at friends' houses, avoiding the tension that now filled every room of their home. But the worst part was watching his marriage slowly unravel. "Maybe you should consider taking something temporary," Sarah suggested one evening after another rejection call. "Just to bring in some income while you keep looking." "I'm not going to flip burgers," David snapped, immediately regretting his tone. "I have 15 years of experience. I'm not starting over at minimum wage. Pride doesn't pay the mortgage." David, the argument that followed was the worst yet. Voices were raised, accusations were made, and things were said that couldn't be taken back. Marcus came downstairs in the middle of it, his face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Can you guys please stop?" he said. "Emma's crying upstairs." David felt like he was drowning. Every day brought new challenges, new bills, new reminders of how quickly his perfect life had disintegrated. He started drinking more, just a beer or two in the evening to take the edge off, he told himself. The final blow came on a Thursday morning in May. David was in his home office, sending out another batch of resumes, when Sarah walked in with an envelope in her hand. "This came for you," she said, her voice flat. David looked at the return address and felt his blood turn cold. It was from a law firm. Inside was a notice of foreclosure proceedings. Despite the grace period, they were behind on payments, and the bank was moving forward with repossession of their home. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, reading over his shoulder. 60 days. That night, Sarah didn't come to bed. David found her in the morning, asleep on the couch with a suitcase beside her. "I'm taking the kids to my sister's," she said when she saw him. "Just for a while, until you figure this out." "Sarah, please, we can work through this together." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore, and I can't let the kids see their father like this." "Like what?" "Lost, angry, drinking every night. This isn't the man I married." David watched helplessly as his wife packed their children's belongings. Emma hugged him goodbye, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. "When are you coming to Annelise's daddy?" she asked. "Soon, sweetheart. Daddy just has some things to take care of first." But they both knew it wasn't true. As Sarah's car disappeared down the street, David stood alone in the house that would soon belong to someone else. In the span of 2 months, he'd lost his job, his home, and now his family. Rock bottom, he thought. Couldn't possibly get any lower. He was wrong. Living in his car wasn't something David had ever imagined. The 2018 Honda Accord that had once been his reliable commuter vehicle was now his bedroom, his office, and his only remaining possession of any value. He'd sold everything else, the furniture, Sarah's jewelry, even his golf clubs, just to buy food and gas. The first night sleeping in a Walmart parking lot was the longest of his life. Every sound made him jump. Car doors slamming, shopping carts rattling, the occasional police siren in the distance. He'd parked under a streetlight for safety, but the constant illumination made sleep nearly impossible. By the 3rd week, David had developed a routine: mornings at the public library for internet access and job applications, afternoons at various coffee shops, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours while he made phone calls, evenings at 24-hour gyms where a $10 day pass bought him a shower and a few hours of air conditioning. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the shame. David had become invisible. One of those people he used to drive past without a second thought. When former colleagues saw him at the library, they'd quickly look away, pretending not to notice his wrinkled clothes and unshaven face. David Martinez. He looked up from the computer terminal to see Rebecca Chun, a former client from his marketing days. She was impeccably dressed, carrying a designer handbag. Everything David used to be. "Rebecca! Hi!" he he managed, suddenly aware of how he must look. I heard about the layoffs at Morrison and Associates. That's terrible. Have you found anything new yet? David wanted to lie, to tell her he was consulting or taking some time off. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. Still looking. It's a tough market out there. Rebecca studied his face for a moment, and David could see the exact moment she realized his situation was worse than he was letting on. Listen, she said, lowering her voice. I know this might not be what you're looking for, but my brother owns a small construction company. They're always looking for reliable people. It's not marketing, but I appreciate it. But I'm really focused on getting back into my field. Rebecca nodded. But before leaving, she pressed a business card into his hand. Just in case, she said. That night, sitting in his car behind a 7-Eleven, David stared at the card. Chun Brothers Construction. He'd spent his entire career building brands and campaigns. The idea of building actual buildings felt like admitting defeat. But defeat, David was learning, was just another word for opportunity in disguise. The next morning, instead of heading to the library, David drove to the address on the card. Chun Brothers Construction was located in an industrial area he'd never visited during his corporate days. The office was a small trailer surrounded by trucks, equipment, and stacks of building materials. You're Rebecca's friend, said Tommy Chun, Rebecca's brother, when David. She said you might be interested in work. Tommy was younger than David, probably in his early 30s, with calloused hands and paint-stained jeans. Everything about him screamed blue-collar worker, the opposite of everything David had been. I've never done construction, David admitted, but I'm willing to learn. Tommy looked him up and down, taking in David's soft hands and pale complexion. It's hard work, physical work. You sure you're up for it? I need the job. Something in David's voice must have convinced Tommy, because he nodded. Okay, $15 an hour to start. You'll be working with my crew chief, Miguel. He'll teach you the basics. Can you start Monday? David wanted to negotiate, to explain that he'd made 6 figures just months ago. Instead, he simply said yes. That first day on the construction site was brutal. David's muscles, soft from years of desk work, screamed in protest as he carried lumber, mixed concrete, and learned to use tools he'd never touched before. His hands, once smooth from office work, were blistered and bleeding by lunch. You okay, office man? Asked Miguel, the crew chief, during their break. David looked at his ruined hands and laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in months. I'm terrible at this. Everyone's terrible at first, Miguel said, offering David a bottle of water. The question is, are you willing to get better? As David looked around the construction site at the half-built house that would soon be someone's home, at the crew of men who'd accepted him without judgment, at the honest work being done with their hands, something shifted inside him. For the first time since losing his job, David felt useful. Not important, not impressive, just useful. And somehow, that felt like enough. Yeah, he told me. I'm willing to get... That night, David called Sarah for the first time in 2 weeks. I got a job, he said when she answered. That's wonderful. What company? It's construction work. I'm learning to build houses. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that David wondered if the call had dropped. Construction? Sarah finally said. I know it's not what we planned, but it's honest work. And Sarah... I think I'm starting to figure some things out. What kind of things? David looked out the window of his car at the stars he'd never noticed during his corporate days. I think I lost myself somewhere along the way. Before I lost the job. Before I lost the house. I think I'd been lost for a long time. For the first time in months. Sarah's voice softened. The kids miss you. I miss them too. But I need to become someone worth coming home to first. 6 months of construction work had transformed David in ways he'd never expected. His soft office hands were now calloused and strong. His pale complexion had been replaced by a healthy tan from working outdoors. But the biggest changes weren't physical. They were in how he saw himself and the world around him. You're getting good at this, Miguel said, watching David expertly frame a doorway. Tommy's been talking about promoting you to assistant crew chief. David paused, hammer in hand, and smiled. A year ago, the idea of being excited about a construction promotion would have seemed absurd. Now, it felt like a genuine accomplishment. I never thought I'd say this, David replied, but I actually love this work. It was true. There was something deeply satisfying about building something tangible, something that would last. Every house they completed represented a family's dreams, just like his own home had once represented his. The irony wasn't lost on him. David had also found a small apartment, nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place above a bakery downtown. It wasn't much, but it was his. He'd finished it slowly, piece by piece, with items from thrift stores and garage sales. Each purchase was deliberate, meaningful in a way his previous possessions had never been. The real test came on a Saturday morning when Sarah agreed to bring the kids for a visit. David had spent the entire previous evening cleaning his modest apartment, making sure everything was perfect. When he heard the knock on his door, his heart raced like it was a first date. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself into his arms the moment he opened the door. At 9 years old, she'd grown taller in the months they'd been apart, but her hug felt exactly the same. Marcus was more reserved, offering an awkward handshake that gradually became a hug. At 17, he was almost as tall as David now, and there was a maturity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Sarah stood in the doorway, taking in the small apartment. David could see her cataloging everything, the second-hand furniture, the tiny kitchen, the single bedroom. "It's not much," David said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's clean," Sarah replied, "and it feels da-da-da." They spent the afternoon walking around downtown, something they'd never done as a family during David's corporate days. They'd always been too busy, too scheduled, too focused on the next achievement to simply enjoy being together. "Tell me about your job," Emma said as they sat in a small park, sharing ice cream from a local shop. David found himself describing his work with enthusiasm he had never felt about marketing campaigns. He told them about the houses he was helping build, about learning new skills, about the satisfaction of creating something with his hands. "Do you miss your old job?" Marcus asked. David considered the question carefully. "I miss the security it provided. I miss being able to give you guys everything you wanted. But the job itself, no, I don't miss it." "Why not?" "Because I was building things that didn't matter. Marketing campaigns that would be forgotten in a month. Now I'm building homes where families will make memories for decades." That evening, after Sarah and the kids had left, David sat on his small balcony overlooking the street below. His phone rang. It was Tommy-chan. "David, I've got a proposition for you," Tommy said. "I'm expanding the business, and I need someone to manage the residential division. Someone who understands both the construction side and the business side. Interested?" The offer was for more responsibility, better pay, and a chance to help grow something meaningful. A year ago, David would have seen it as a step down from his corporate position. Now, it felt like a step forward. "I'm very interested," David replied. 3 months later, David stood in front of a house he'd helped design and build from the ground up. It was move-in day for the Rodriguez family, a young couple with 2 small children who reminded him of his own family years earlier. "Thank you," Mrs. Rodriguez said, tears in her eyes as David handed her the keys. "This is our dream home." David watched as their children ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the walls he'd helped frame. This was what success really looked like. Not corner offices or 6-figure salaries, but the ability to contribute something meaningful to the world. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "The kids want to know if you're free for dinner Sunday." "I'm making your favorite," David smiled, typing back, "I'll be there." As he drove home to his small apartment, David reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd lost everything he thought mattered. His job, his house, his status, his family. But in losing those things, he'd found something more valuable. Himself. The man who'd been fired from that corporate job 18 months ago was gone. In his place was someone stronger, more grounded, more connected to what really mattered. David had learned that rock bottom wasn't the end of his story. It was the foundation for building something better. His phone rang again. This time, it was Emma. "Daddy, I told my teacher about your job today. She said construction workers are heroes because they build the places where people live and work and learn. What do you think about that?" David asked. "I think she's right." "I'm proud of you, Daddy." David pulled over, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time in his adult life, he was proud of himself too. Not for what he owned or how much money he made, but for who he'd become. The road ahead was still uncertain. He and Sarah were taking things slowly, rebuilding trust along with the relationship. The kids were adjusting to their new reality. Money was still tight, and there were no guarantees. But David had learned something invaluable. True security didn't come from a job title or a bank account. It came from knowing you could lose everything and still find a way to rebuild. It came from understanding that your worth wasn't measured by your possession, but by your character. As he started his car and headed home, David smiled. Tomorrow, he'd start building another family's dream home. And in doing so, he'd continue building the life he was meant to live. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel for notifications about upcoming videos. Leave a like and comment on this video so we can improve our future content. Thank you for staying until the end.